History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon. We are super excited to have you join us again on this Thursday at noon so you can have a different kind of lunch on today where we can feed your soul and your spirit on today with an amazing conversation we are super excited about and a wonderful guest that I'll introduce in a matter of moments who will certainly be able to offer up to us some great information that we hope you can take some tidbits, go back, research for yourself, and to be able to expand your understanding of what it means for us to see ourselves in the world and not just in an American context. But before we get into that, I want to make sure that you share Fannie Lou's Classroom with your family, your friends, your colleagues. Make sure they like us on Instagram. Make sure they like us on Facebook. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and make sure you hit the notification bell so you can be alerted whenever we go live. So thank you for joining us once again in your ongoing support of Fannie Lou's Classroom. And listen, we're back with season 2. We're a few episodes in, but we also want to let you know this season, we need your support. And so what we now have to offer is Fannie Lou's Classroom t-shirt that's available for sale, and you can go and purchase that t-shirt even right now. If you go to our description box, you will see a link for you to purchase a t-shirt so you can help us support our efforts here in the Fannie Lou's Classroom. We try to bring the best to you so we can have robust conversations, but conversations that are accessible to everybody so that we all might be able to grow in this dynamic learning community with each other, because we know one person is not the holder of all the information. So thank you for being with us today in the classroom. And you know we have to always give major props to our Fannie Lou Classroom team, where we shout out Brooke and Roche, who are our engineers for the show. Yes, let's go ahead and give it up for them. And then, of course, you know, we have Shanika and Cheryl, who are part of the team, who are always on the case and holding it down and supporting the classroom to make sure I have everything I need to host the show. So I'm so grateful and thankful for them. So we can give it up for Cheryl. We can get no hand clap. Come on, Brooke, give us some love. And so as we always like to start and lean into the show, we have a little segment that we call Fannie's Class, where we want to talk about either a hot topic, something that's going on, which is always something in this country and in this world, or if we're trying to do something historical to connect the conversation that we're going to have on today. So let's step into the classroom for just a moment.
In Fannie Lou's class.
Now don't you dare be late. We need retention, not detention.
So today what I want to lift up to kind of connect what the conversation will be about today is, and this, as we keep saying, February, at Friendship West, as we say, February is not Black History Month for us. It's just a February edition of Black History Month, because we celebrate Black history 24/7, 365 here. But what I want to lift up today is the founding of the Free African Society by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones that was founded in 1787. And I wanted us not to miss the name of the organization, the Free African Society. And they went on then to form Mother Bethel AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church, because they left the Methodist Church because they were not allowed to kneel and pray with the white Methodists. So they kept the Methodism. They did not leave that behind, but they left and started their own church. And I don't want to miss the fact that they said African. They didn't say color. They didn't say black. They were intentional about the language. And I think it speaks to how they saw themselves as African, though they were in America. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about on today is how do we see ourselves in this larger diaspora, as opposed to only seeing ourselves in the confines of the political borders which make up the United States of America. And to look then to the Sankofa moment, to look back to the ancestors to see how they saw themselves, why they saw themselves that way, and the necessity of seeing ourselves that way. And that's what we're going to talk about in the classroom on today with our amazing guest. And Fannie Lou Hamer, and I got to bring her into this space, she said this quote, she often would say, whether you have a PhD or no degree, whether you went to Morehouse or no house, we are all in this bag together. And I think we have to see that, not just who's in the bag, whether we came straight out of Africa, straight out of the Caribbean, or we were born here in America. We have to see ourselves, right, as part of this larger diaspora. And today's topic, the show itself, talks about the differences of boat stop. Because here's the reality. The slave ships did not drop off Dominicans, Haitians, Puerto Ricans, Cubans. They dropped off Africans, right? So how do we begin to connect more of these dots to see that some of the same structures that we deal with in America that causes and imposes a lot of trauma, soul trauma on the souls of Black folks, it happens to Black folks the world over. And so we're going to have a good conversation on today with our guest. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce her so we can then jump into our conversation, which I think is going to be very rich on today. And again, I think a lot will be said. We'll give you an opportunity to go back and do more research and discovery on your own. As you know, Classroom is designed to do just that, to give you that space and that information to continue to grow and develop. So super excited. This is a young lady that I met last August at the Black Church Summit in Chicago, Illinois, and immediately Dr. Carruthers, Mama Iva, to many of us, introduced us, and we just clicked right away. And I started, shouting some stuff back to her. She shouted some stuff back to me. It's like, hey, we got to get together and do some things. So we're planning to do something great later this year. But then I said, she needs to come to the classroom. She has too much to offer that we need to get out there and be able to get her on an additional platform. She has her own platforms that we'll talk about in a matter of moments. So I'm super excited to have Azmera Hammouri-Davis with us on today. And so I'm going to read a bit of her bio. You can get her full bio when you look into our description box to get the full bio of her. But I'm going to read something short just to give you a sense of who she is and who we have with us today. We have Azmera Hammouri-Davis. She is a Black-Palestinian American, innovator, emcee, cultural shaper, and prayer warrior from Hawaii. I didn't know that. Founder of Break the Boxes Stories podcast. She works to highlight wisdom across faith traditions and generations. She is a Fulbright Creative and Performing Arts recipient, a MICAH awardee from the Lilly Foundation, and an alumna of Harvard Divinity School, where she received her Masters of Theological Studies, focused on African American religions, and the University of Southern California, where she got her BA in Visual and Performing Arts from the School of Dramatic Arts and a BA in Social Science from the Department of Psychology. So let's welcome, I'm going to call her Sister Azmera. She's my sister and growingly becoming my friend. So welcome, Azmera, to Fannie Lou's Classroom on this afternoon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is a joy to be with you. And I mean, every time when I hear you speak that bio, I'm saying, who is that? You be forgetting what you do.
You forget all the stuff you've done. That's right. We do, because we do so much, right? We're just moving with our head down, doing the work. And all that credentialing and all of that labor you put on that front line. I mean, you do it, sis, and we are grateful for that. And we will always acknowledge that, right? Because it just adds to this liberation movement that's not just here in America, but the world over as relates to to Black folks, including Northeast Africans, i.e. Palestinians, right? So certainly want to make sure that we lift that up. So let's just jump right into the conversation. So
let's do it.
What I want to do, I'm going to go back and read the episode summary to remind people of what we're talking about on today. So today's episode, as people of African descent, we're going to discuss the necessity of engaging in and reclaiming, reclaiming, and reconnecting our histories, our stories, struggles, and discovering the ways African spirituality and religion move us closer to global movement for Black people to create communities marked by justice, peace, love, liberation, and dare I might say, healing from the soul trauma we have experienced from dominating systems in this world. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Azmera, so here's how I want to start this conversation. I was on social media last night on Instagram. And so, Rihanna and A$AP Rocky did, a Vogue spread. I think it's in Britain. They did it for the for Britain, right? And so they had pictures, obviously, of her son, and she described him as fine, right? And so then social media went into a tizzy in an uproar. Like, why would she call him fine? Really only seeing it from a very particular lens, right? Using that language. And so, but of course, if you talk to Barbadians, you talk to West Africans even, right? We understand that fine doesn't mean fine how we define it here in America. Right? She's saying her son is a strong baby, a good looking baby. She's describing her son not physically as we understand fine. We talk about a brother over here in the corner, if he a tall drink of water. That's not the kind of fine she's talking about. Right? So I think that I want to first start with, I think even something like that shows us where we have a major disconnect in how we don't even understand each other, right? And so can we start first by, can you help us understand what the term African diaspora even means and why we have to see ourselves as part of it?
Yeah, wow, such a good question. And I always am excited when I get students who come to me and they are students of African descent. We know first and foremost that our diaspora is what we call heterogeneous, right? So to break that down, it just means that there's as many ways to be Black or to be Afro-descendant as there is to be human, right? We're not a monolith. There's not just one way to be or to express our spirituality. But when we talk about the African diaspora, we're really talking about, and you kind of rooted us in that conversation, post-colonization, right? One, the Black genome, Blackness, has existed far longer than the white genome, right? We know, there are scientists. Dr. Carlos Moore is one that I will lift up, who talks about and who studies the ways that, Black genomes, the white genome comes out of Blackness, right? Every color exists in the Black genome, whereas, white, for example, which is often what we are accustomed to seeing ourselves through this lens of the white world, right? There's, European colonization that happened during that transatlantic slave trade and brought many African descendant people from West Africa, right? From Nigeria, from Ghana, from Angola, to different parts of, of the West. But also to different parts of, we have folks that over 40% of people who were enslaved were brought to the ports in Salvador Bahia, Brazil. So that's around 2 million enslaved people were brought to Salvador Bahia, Brazil, whereas only around, a much smaller number came to the U.S. About 400,000 enslaved people were brought here to the U.S. So we say diaspora because we know that the origin of where our people come from was actually this continent, this beautiful continent we call Africa, right? And within the continent of Africa, there are, a myriad of countries, right? With a myriad of what we'll say lexicons, which is really just languages, ethnic groups, tribes, customs, cultures, right? And it's important that we acknowledge that because in the U.S., especially and in the West, a lot of us who grow up generational African American, meaning our grandparents, and our grandparents' were enslaved here in this country, like myself. We grow up often not aware of the connection that we have as people who are a part of this diaspora. We grow up thinking of Africa as a monolith because, meaning thinking of Africa as if it's just some, it's whatever Hollywood paints it to be, that it's just the, Eddie Murphy Coming to America kind of film, right? Maybe some folks have seen that. And it's so important that we, one, debunk that myth, right? Because there are as many ways to be a part of this diaspora as there are to be human, but also there's rich languages, cultures, customs, ways of knowing, ways of being that we're not necessarily taught, but also that shows up in who we are and how we express our spirituality in ways that differ from whiteness, for example. When you're going to, I don't know if anyone has gone to, predominantly white worship church spaces or not, but I've been to a few, right? And the ways that we express, when we're worshiping, our worship experience, or even when we're just hearing the pastor preach, there's a call and response, right? There's, okay, now, Pastor, we're talking to them, right? We're engaging. We're having a dialogue. We're letting them know that someone is in the room listening and feeling what they are saying and hearing them, right? There's an expressivity. Some scholars call it an Africanity that might not be a natural custom or show up, culturally for people if you were, in a different kind of space where you got to be, if a needle drops in the room, you will hear it, right? It's quiet.
Right.
You're just taking it in. You understand what I'm saying?
That's right.
And so I say all that to say, just to answer your question, and I do tend to go on my tangent, so feel free to bring me back. But
Tangents are
when we
okay
talk
here.
about Afro-diaspora, we're talking about people of African descent who were brought during that transatlantic slave period to different parts of the North America and South America. When we talk about Afro-Indigenous traditions, practices, and customs, we're talking about the indigenous practices that are still, that still lived post, is the Islamization of the continent and the Christianization of the continent within those specific regions. So you have diasporic practices like Haitian Hodo or Vodon, or like Santeria, which showed up in Cuba, or Candomblé, which emerged in Bahia in Brazil, right? Different ways of Afro-diasporic religious expressions that have showed up that are really connected to their origins, but also that have not been what you'll hear is like sort of Christianized in a way, right? The Abrahamic religion. So I'll stop there. But that's a little bit of what we're talking about.
That's a little bit of what we're talking about. I hope y'all caught that. I didn't catch all of that. I'm going to have to go back and watch it too. So, but I think, and we'll get to more, because we're going to branch out and talk about the ways in which a lot, and that whole Herkowitz and argument of Ian Fraser that everything was killed and nothing survived, but a lot did survive, right? In terms of our customs, in terms of how our African spirituality, how it did make its way, and how you had syncretism that happened, right? And we'll talk about some of that, because I think a lot of times what we're so anti, and it has everything to do with the white, what I call the white aesthetic gaze on Black people, right? In terms of religion and how we view that. And I'm thinking even about Azmera. I'm thinking about I remember Dr. Jeremiah Wright used to come here and do the African American Heritage Lecture Series. And one time we were talking about church, and you think about the migration patterns, right? And how you had people from the South as they migrated north, and the churches up north were more high church, more high silk stocking, more of the Anglican, right? Where you're quiet, you don't make all that noise, you sit still, you don't use your whole body to worship. And you had the Black folks from the South coming up, call and response, ring, shout, like they bringing that Brush Harbor religion and spirituality right to the north in those churches, and how the tension you then had, right? And I remember Dr. Wright said he talked about the name escapes me of the man, but essentially his family went north, went to the church, and they were coming to music, instruments, etc. And they said, we don't do church that way. This is the proper way to worship God. And the response from one of the elders was, without the beat, the spirit don't come, right? And there's notion of understanding the way in which God shows up, and how then, and so of course at then we're talking, those would have been Black folks born here, but still connected enough to their African customs and heritage, right? And so I want to talk about, in some ways, and we'll talk about, Candomblé in Yoruba. I want to talk about those, because I want to also connect. I want you to help us connect how a lot of what we do, and this is something Dr. Wright always said, and you see it every day, a lot of stuff we do is purely African, and we don't know it. Things that have been passed down, stuff that we do. Because I'm going to tell you something my grandmother used to do. See, I go on tangents too, but that's okay. We're going to come back to the questions.
I love it. I'm here for it. So, please tell us about your grandma.
Because one thing, my grandmother, now, she lived in the country. I'm talking about like when it was country dark. It wasn't no lights. When it was dark, you couldn't see your hand. So, I hated going down there, because I was like, you can't see down here. But one thing my grandma do, if a storm was coming, she would take an axe and chop up the ground around the house. Now, I'm just thinking, what is Granny doing, right? We call her Granny Woods. Like, what is she doing out there, And so it wasn't until Dr. Wright came and talked about the Shango, the axe god, and that it was, of lightning. And so she's chopping up the ground, how she is viewing this when the storm comes, so the lightning doesn't strike the house. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if she knew that, because my grandmother was also part Cherokee Indian, right? Native, right? So I don't know if she knew that. I just thought she never explained, and we didn't ask no questions, right? Because you also had to go in the house and sit down, take off all your jewelry, and don't move. So what I'm saying, I think it's a lot of things we do that are purely African and we don't know it. And I think about Mama Itihari, how she talks about the ways that when we say venerate our ancestors, people demonize that, say that we're doing is devilment, right? When we're talking, it's nothing more than saying honor your ancestors. And that's what the Bible tells us to do, which is an African book, by the way, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so I think we can allow people to tell us not to do something and making us feel like it's evil when they venerate the saints. I mean, you look at the Catholic tradition, right? When you go to New Orleans and other places, I see a gazillion statues of saints. You know, so I want to also, if you could, so let's talk about then the ways that some of African religions and customs survived the European slave trade, i.e., Candomblé, Yoruba, Santeria, and the syncretism that took place. Because for a lot of our folks, right, they said, oh, you saying we can't practice, but we see what you're doing over here. Oh, we'll just cover that. We'll just clothe that. We know what we're doing, right? We're going to use what you have and syncretize that and still hold on. So talk to us about, let's first go to by year. Let's talk about Yoruba. And can you talk to us a bit about, just talk a little bit about what the Yoruba religion is and where you see the syncretism even in here in America in the way in which we worship.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to what you just shared. And to start off, first, I want to lift up Dr. Jacob Olupona's work, who, he wrote this book that really kind of provides a very short introduction for anyone who's curious about African religions. I would really encourage you, you can check out this book. It's called African Religions, and it literally is called African Religions, a very short introduction. Because Dr. Jacob Olupona, he was a professor. He's a professor here, one of the only ones, and I'm currently calling in from Harvard campus, so that's why I'm saying here. But he talks a lot about how Yoruba customs, cultures, traditions survived. Christianization survived within the continent, within the continent of Africa, but also specifically Nigeria. And he talks about the way that, for example, and I won't say that he talks about this, and now I'm paraphrasing, but when you talk about syncretism, what does that mean, right? It literally means it's the synchronizing of the merging together, the question of how do we preserve that which is unique to our traditions, but also have to integrate by force because of colonization into this particular space. I'm thinking specifically of Salvador Bahia, Brazil, because that's where my research was based. That's where I lived for, 10 months. And that's the community that I'm still connected to, because my way into Africana spirituality, just to give folks a little bit of sort of background of where I'm coming from, because again, it's important to acknowledge that there, as you said, there's no one person, one knowledge holder of a tradition so vast, right? And it's always so important to root in our own experiences to inform the lens that we're speaking from. And so I grew up in a very, Pan-African household. We grew up, celebrating the African American tradition of Kwanzaa, right? We knew our Ngosa Saba. We knew the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, which are rooted in the Kiswahili language, right? Umoja, Kujichagulia, Ujima, Ujama, Nia, Kuumba, Imani, and what all of that meant. And then I also grew up practicing the Afro-Brazilian tradition, and it's a martial art, but it's heavily influenced, especially its original, the practitioners of its early days, were heavily influenced by Candomblé, because capoeira emerged after the emancipation of slavery. Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888. And what you had was, newly freed formerly enslaved peoples, they weren't allowed to practice self-defense, so they disguised their practice as a dance.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever their master would come around, they disguised it as a dance. But what they were doing was they were singing songs, they were strengthening their bodies, they were doing moves like the jinga, the bensal, martelu, mealua. And after they were freed, they would practice in the streets, which always included a circle, what we call a roda, and it always involved hand clapping, energy exchange. It was a fortifying of the spirit through the embodied knowledge and wisdom, by singing songs that reflected everydayness. Some songs talk about, Voji zero meu senor que a manteiga derramou. They're talking about, I'm going to go tell, o senior, the slave master, that the butter fell. They say, a manteiga não é minha, a manteiga de yo-yo. Like, the butter isn't mine, the butter is the son of the masters. Like, they invoke kind of play as a form of subversive kind of survival. They're playing around, they're messing with, the slave master's son, right? So in this tradition of capoeira, there's a lot of these rich sort of everyday, like, quotidian practices that come to life. And now when we talk about the syncretism, one thing that we can root ourselves in is knowing, for example, in the region of Bahia, there's a church that you can go to, and hopefully, inshallah, we will get to go. It's called the Igreja do Senhor do Bom Fim. It's the Church of Jesus Christ. And we all know, it's commonly known that the Portuguese, they were Catholic, and so they sort of imposed Catholicism on the enslaved peoples. But they would still practice recognizing the orishas, but they also had to learn how to, the meaning that they attached to different saints were made parallel to certain orishas. For example, Legba, the god, he's the messenger god, was akin to the Book of John, right? The messenger who came and delivered, he delivered the message, but also, participated in water baptisms and whatnot. And so I say that as one example of the ways that you're making practices had to be made parallel to preserve.
That's right.
And acknowledge, okay, this saint that you have in this European practice is possessing certain sort of spiritual prowess that we have in Legba, or you brought up the color red earlier, and how some folks, you see Rihanna and what she's wearing red at the Super Bowl halftime, looking fire, in my opinion. Right. But some people be like, okay, she's devil worshiping, right? Even the concept of devil worship, is it's known that the concept of the devil is not even doesn't even exist in an African cosmology, right? Like in Bantu cosmology. Like the concept of the devil was something that was really introduced in Abrahamic traditions. And so for folks who are like, well, what is Abrahamic traditions? Those are the three largest practice religions in the U.S. In the world. I'm sorry. So that's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? Like the father Abraham is sort of thought to be the one that birthed sort of those lineages and sort of those heritages that we learn about in the Bible. So I say that because the color red is actually, like in Candomblé, for example, which is rooted in the Yoruba tradition, red is the color of the goddess Yun-Sun, who's the god, she's the goddess of thunder and lightning, and she's a fierce warrior. And so that power to protect, that power to if she needed to create tornadoes to allow what needs to fall so that something new can be birthed, like she has that prowess, that power. So color and symbolism takes on different meanings depending on, our own spiritual orientations.
Right.
But again, we can come to fear, the red because that's associated with the devil, because that's all we grew up seeing was the devil with the fork and the horns, right? In different, shows. But actually, I invite folks to, to take a deeper dive, or to be curious about, at the very least, be curious about what meaning different colors and symbols took on for these different practices. I'm talking about candomblé because that's what I'm most familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that, Shango, shows up in other diasporic practices, as well. We know that Oshun, the goddess of fertility, her color is yellow, right? Like she shows up. She's ever present, sweet like honey. Or Mama, Yemanja, right? Yemanja, she's also considered Yemanya. If you're, again, speaking, I believe, like for folks who are observant of Santeria, I think she may be referred to as Yemanya.
Mm-hmm.
But in Brazil, that you would always celebrate, the day of Yemanja. She's the goddess of the water. Her color is blue. She cleanses, she renews, replenishes, right? It's like still waters run deep, so she can be still often, but runs very deep. But then you also know when the water, when the waves are, are coming and going, and they come in sets of threes, there's something there as well that she has to teach. So
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
this is offering a little bit of insight into
Well,
some of the sort of the way syncretism may be alive. I don't know if I'm,
No. So, no, but you're definitely probably offering up a lot of what people have never heard of. And so part of what we're trying to do is to expand, right, our worldview, particularly our religious and theological worldviews. And I think what I want to point out is that what you have really laid out is that this is what I often tell people, that oftentimes we have a God known by many names. So when you do that and people are like, oh, no, it's just one God. Okay, but I hear y'all saying Jehovah Shalom, God of peace. Right? We have God who's a healer. So you really do call God many names because you see God as whatever you need God to be in that moment for you. So we do that already, right? But I think it's because we're so disconnected, right, from Yoruba practices, Voodoo, and to your point, how Westerners have so made it evil, right? And we can take that all the way back to, I know John Thornton does a really good book in his book, I think it's entitled Africans and how Africans in Africa shaped the Atlantic world, and the ways in which in the beginning when Europeans finally were able to navigate the waters and make it to the continent, as we know, already well-established cultures, religions, all that was there. It was already there. They already understood God in a particular way. And so when he talks about when Europeans first arrived, that it was an exchange of how they saw the divine. But it wasn't until then the Europeans began to want to dominate is where they begin to try to codify and put bound God in books and say, if you go beyond what we said this God who God is, then you are worshiping the devil, or you are engaging in acts that are not of God, right? So for me...
And that goes back to what Thurman pointed out for us, right? In
yes.
This inheritance, where he talks specifically about, again, there's so many ways that the text began to be a form of maintaining that oppression, that enslavement, making sure our minds felt guilty if we tried to seek our freedom, right? Or even Cone with Jesus, he wrote The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and Cone talks specifically, he goes deep into that, and and the death of Emmett Till, and again how that brainwashing, right? How the Bible has been used, because we must look at who has the power to shape the narrative that we are then ingesting. And what I love about the work that you all do and the work that Proctor does and the journey that we're all on is it's a journey of unlearning, right? Yes. And learning how to hold on to, right? The truth that is alive in our faith tradition and practice, and also to unlearn the lies that are rooted in scarcity and false, false truths, right? We learn about like not worshiping false idols, and there's this fear that's created around, but it's interesting that the fear is always created around anything African, right? That's demonized. Right? And that must tell us, what is so threatening about this continent that they had to make sure that we were socialized to fear it ourselves.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
What is so threatening? Because the truth is what will threaten and cause people to, them to want to control, right? So that we can stay controlled.
Because you said so much, and because I want to pull out just some things that you said that I hope that we can make the clear connections, right? So that's one I wanted to make that. That was the first point. Then another thing that as you were saying that what came to my mind was, we know very well what it means to be subversive in our language. So you talked about the way that existed in South America. And let me first pause and say thank you for saying Americas with the S, because people forget it's 3 Americas. You know what I mean? Because we're the USC is so dominant, we think America is just here. Right? There's 3 Americas, so let's be clear about that. So, but let's talk about, so you talked about the subversion, the way in which our ancestors did that in South America, but we did that here too, right? We look at a lot of the songs that our enslaved ancestors sang, how they had coded language in their music, and let's bring it up to 2023. Half of us who work in corporate America know how to code switch. We know how to have a full conversation and full view of white folks don't know what we're talking about. So what I'm saying is, you see I'm saying is how we make these connections. Say you already doing it. Then we're asking you to do is to your point, unlearn what you have been told, and to relearn, to reclaim, because that is where you really strengthen your soul. That is, as we know in the African view, the soul is 2 things, right? It is that immortal part that existed with God long before we came through our mother's womb, because it said, Jeremiah, I knew you before you were formed in your mother's womb. And his mama Itzihari would say, you think that just stopped at Jeremiah? That's God's creation, right? Then it's that soul of us, that soul part of us that can be impacted by social injustice, whether that's structural violence, physical violence, etc. Right? So how that and those dominating systems, as Walter Wink would call them, right? Those dominant systems damage that soul, that part of the soul, where we call soul trauma, whether it's psychological, emotional, structural, whatever it might be. And so part of that healing and recovery comes from understanding who you are, right? And where you've been connected to, and stop running, not run from it. And to your point, how do we unlearn it? Oh, that's not evil. And to your point, why is it everything African is got to be, everything connected to that is what's evil? Everything connected to that is what is not of God. Why is that? And asking that question, and then doing that deeper dive and owning and, being and understanding that, yes, we have a unique experience as folks who were, born, raised, and have this, this U.S. experience, but I also understand we also have a lot of commonalities, that we're still fighting the same dominant system wherever we are in the world. Right. So it may look a little different, but it's still there. Right. And sometimes it's in blackface.
That's right.
Because let's be clear, because a lot of people, when colonization left, that mindset stayed behind. Right. So then we just mimic what was there. And so it's just in blackface. And that's the other thing I wanted to point out in what you said. I thought so well, because I want to show the connections that some of this you already do. This not foreign. And it wasn't foreign on this soil. Our ancestors did it, and you still do it today when you're around certain people, right? So thank you so much.
And your body knows.
Yes.
It's within your. It's the knowledge. It's what you feel in your gut, right? When Harriet had to free herself first before she could come back and free everyone else. What told her which path to take? Right? She was connected to her body, and she was often, it was the illness that she had. They termed it an illness. They termed, it a dis-ease of her mind, because she got physically, back to the soul trauma, she got psychologically hurt by, one of the slave savages, I'll call them, right? Those masters.
Psychologically and physically hurt.
Who hit her upside the head. Right. But connecting back, your body knows, and you can trust your body. And when you are feeling embodied and you're listening to your body, you can consider that a connection with your ancestors in the most Afro-diasporic way. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And so, but that goes back to, and this is Cone again, right? That as Black folks, we don't have a dual, well, some of us do now, but when you go back to the Rush Harvest, right? We didn't have a dualistic theology that God cared about body and soul. And to your point that we don't see a disconnect there. To your point that your body also speaks, right?
That's right.
And so that's why we got to be
That's
sure
right.
not to disconnect that, because I think that also impacts, just our health wise, when we think about how we're feeling, and we may dismiss some signs that our body is telling us to pay attention, and we may dismiss that, not understand your body is talking to you long before it gets to the point where it becomes, either deadly or to a point where you have, maybe the illness has gone too long. And it's why I think a lot of Black women are, those of us who are very in tune, we go to the doctor and the doctor dismisses that, why we didn't have to fight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely going off a tangent, so let me come back. But I'm just saying that all of this is connected. None of this is a disconnect. And we can't see it as something new, right? This is not new. And, as Mama Itari say, it's very few things that are brand new in this world. And because we don't know history and not connected, we think it's new because we don't know history and we're not connected. We're not connecting the dots. 1619 Project, that's on Hulu, episode 2. I knew this, but the way in which Nicole Hannah-Jones framed it, I was like, wow. And she went all the way back to how enslaved women, how many, not live births they had, but how many pregnancies they had. And you think they were able to have any kind of healing from that? Having those many miscarriages, giving birth to dead babies in that field, and still have to get up and still pick that cotton, and chop that tobacco, and be then also subjugated to the white male aesthetic gaze that your body is not your own. And then they connected that to the maternal mortality rate in Black women today. So what I'm saying is, so we asked you to come down to Austin on the 13th and be a part of our maternal care rally in our day of advocacy. We ain't just talking about we're saying that this has been something that this is systemic. And it's intentional. It just doesn't happen. Like it's intentional. Okay, let me come back to the conversation, but it's important to see.
I do want to connect that.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I want to connect that.
Go ahead.
That's directly connected to what to what our faith teaches us, and also to I'm holding on to Tricia Hersey's work, Rest as Resistance.
Yes.
And specifically that when our bodies are back to what our bodies know to be true, when you need to rest, right? Like you just know because your body will tell you. And I think there's a lot of guilt. This is what I wanted to say. In her work, she talks about how our bodies are ancient. Before capitalism, so capitalism is what rooted in, in enslavement and exploiting our Black labor, right? And especially Black women's physical, emotional, spiritual labor, right? It's entitled to it. Capitalism is relatively new when you look at the grand scheme of things, of how long have our people, as a people of African descent, we existed well before colonization, right? Like the Western world will have us thinking that our beginning was, being enslaved. And we know that's not true. We existed well before then. And that was well before we had these technologies to keep us distracted often, right? Well before we've been so disconnected, but also well before we were so exploited that we think we got to keep on just, going through the motions and being numb, right? It's like, no, the rest, when you choose to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes just for yourself and practice that, your worthiness, your enoughness is not connected to how much you produce, how much you're doing. You deserve to be. Be. And that is where, to me, because when you're being, then you can have the space to create, to think up new ideas, right? To imagine up a new world. We're walking inside of, truly this is a white man's imagination of what a society should be. And we know it's not doing well, right? It is not it. Like,
that's right.
They had to come together and decide this is how we're going to put cages. We're going to cage people. We're going to have this kind of punitive system, this kind of health system.
That's right.
And we know it's our people who are always at, the mercy of, but also always given the short end. And so just encouraging folks to see, recognizing that when you're connecting to your body and you're letting yourself be for 10 minutes, Your boss can wait. You know what I'm saying? Like you can take you deserve a little bit of rest
We
to
all
counter
do. That's
those
right.
years and decades of entitlement to your labor and absorbing it for their wealth. You understand what I'm saying?
Ashe, yes,
And
I'm very clear.
I see that as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
You know, as a spiritual understanding that's you connecting to your ancestors that knew well before this system arrived.
Right. And if, most of people probably watching, particularly those connected to Friendship West, as in Christian tradition, right, we think about Jesus, who, our Savior, but our elder brother, right, that we see he always pulled away and rested, right? He understood when it was time for me to go over here by myself. Y'all stay down here and pray. I'm going to go up here and pray, right? And how he's always slipping away because that's important, right? That's so important. And, man, we could a whole nother conversation around capitalism and the exploitation of Black labor, but that's a whole nother show.
You're right. I went on a whole tangent.
No. But that's because that's important, because that's directly. Yeah, we can really talk about how really the way in which corporate America works. Obviously the main difference between enslavement and corporate America, but the notion of, to your point, that you are valued, you are seen as valuable based on your productivity and what you can produce for someone else's wealth, to gain wealth, right?
Yes.
So I want to do this. Man, time is going fast. Okay, so here's what I want to do next. And I want to do this because obviously, as we talk about Fannie Lou's classroom, we are certainly about, that being justice seekers. And I often say you can't be a justice seeker unless you're a truth teller. They go hand in hand. So we're hoping also that part of the way in which I feel like seeking justice is also having right relationships with one another, right? And I think part of that means for us as people, and I'm saying, obviously I'm using Black, I obviously know that's a political term, but I'm saying, or a socially constructed term, but that's how we see ourselves. But I want to talk about, if here in America, we are constantly battling and fighting policies, laws, whether that's police reform, which I don't believe in police reform at this point, is so corrupt that you got to tear that thing down and radically reimagine what it means. But let's just look at those things that we're trying to advocate for. And I'm saying I always say spirit is never left on the table. And we have to be able to be open enough. If someone joins us in some of these movements, right, they may not show up the way you think it looks, right, in terms of how people see themselves and how they see God working in the world. That we have to be open to, if somebody does come and say, oh, I don't practice Christianity, but I practice Yoruba, right? So and understand that that's not a total disconnect, not to immediately see that as something that you can't connect to and that you can't embrace, right, and learn from. So I want to go back to, because it's still, February edition of Black History Month. I want to talk about the Haitian Revolution for a moment and the role that African spirituality played, because it's something to tap into the spirits to get, as Joey Youngblood used to say, because if you praying to your God to put your foot on my neck, I'm praying to my God to saying get your foot off my neck. But he used much colorful language that I can't use in Fannie's classroom because I'm connected to the church. If I wouldn't, I would say exactly what he said. but I think that's real. So one of the things I want to do is talk about the Haitian Revolution, but before the revolution kicked off, something happened. And I want to read what happened before it kicked off, and I'm going to let you pick it up from there. So, because this gets left out. Duty Bookman's prayer is always talked about, right? But we don't talk about the sister, Cecile Fatima, who was there with him, facilitating that ceremony and that prayer that really ushered in the Haitian Revolution, right? So I want to read his prayer, and I want us to think about this. And because here at French West, Dr. Haynes always preaches about you got to get rid of the white Jesus. It's killing you. Right, and white Jesus meaning what white, of course they have snatched evangelical from us, where we don't even use that word anymore because they have so distorted it, right? But it's killing us. So I want to read his prayer, and then I want you to just kind of take it from there and kind of talk about the power, right, and tapping into spirit. So this is Boukman's prayer, which went along with Cecile Fatima, who help initiate that. It says, good God, big G God, who created the sun, which shines on us from above, who rouses the sea and makes the thunder rumble. Listen, God, big G God, though hidden in the cloud, watches over us. The little G God of the white man calls forth crime, but our big G God wills good works. Our God, who is a good God, commands us revenge. He will direct our arms and help us. Throw away the likeness of the white man's God, little G God, who has often brought us to tears, and listen to liberty which speaks in all of our hearts. So, obviously it was a full ceremony that went along with that, but this is what was prayed, not to mention, the herbs and the all of what they took from the ground, right? That whole ceremony, what took place there, things they did from nature. Because, of course, we got a whole different relationship with ecology, but we can't go into all of that. But all of that matters, right? But just talk to us a little bit about these final moments before we kind of close this segment out about, the role that African spirituality played in the Haitian Revolution and what we might want to consider as we keep talking about how we tear down, deconstruct these dominating systems here in America, whether that's patriarchy, misogyny, hyper-capitalism, etc.
Yeah. What you said was so crucial, that our relationship, you said ecology, and I'll translate that into our relationship to the land, to nature, is vital to our sense of spirit and our sense of self. Jesus also spent time on the land. We know that Jesus was not afraid. He began with tears, right? Jesus wept, the Bible says, right? He, in honoring and looking at, if we look at the Haitian Revolution, right? And I'm sure many folks may be familiar with the fact that what's so special about Haiti is that they didn't just organize one revolt and uprising and overthrow their, those quote unquote, those savages, right? I'll call them savages. They were savages. They were barbaric, right? Opposite of what we are taught about ourselves. We're taught that we're the most uncivilized, when really in the grand scheme of things, if we look at who's been the most barbaric, we know it is Euro descendant anyway. So they didn't just uprise one.
Let me say this, and people, we don't even have to make it up. They were so comfortable in it, they wrote about it. So I just want to make that clear, right? You wrote about it, and we have, and we have our ancestors who bore witness to it. But you also wrote about it. But I'm sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to say that. Go ahead.
Exactly. You wrote about it to an extent, but in these history books that we grow up in these public school systems learning about, we don't learn enough about the level of barbarity. That's right. That enslavement was. Right.
That's
we don't get access to Frederick Douglass narratives until you get to a college, right? And that should be, and to this day, back to what we talked about, folks are trying to make sure that we don't learn about our history in schools, that it's banned. And again, I say, ask why that is. Don't believe everything that you hear.
Come on.
Now, back to your question about what was the role of Haitian Vodou in that uprising. One, this is what I would venture to argue, is that when you think about how oppression first comes for your spirit, first it wants to if it can convince you that you are not worthy, that you are not worthy of seeking the healing that you need, if it can make you cynical, if it can make you demoralized, if it can make you hate yourself, it's doing its job.
It's doing its job.
And so for the Haitian people to be able to be, their spiritual practice, Vodou, was such a core element that allowed for them, right? Because they, when we talk about matters of the spirit, we're talking about intimate core beliefs about oneself and about the God of goodness, knowing, right? That they must have known that the God of goodness did not mean for them to be enslaved. And they didn't just know, they believed it to the extent that they were like, we are going to turn this thing around. We are fortified in our knowing, because the God of goodness that we serve, that maybe they call different names, right? But just for the purpose of communicating that, would not have this any longer, right? We're not going to be pacified. We're not going to be pacifist. We're not going to be just stand here and say, oh, well, God will take care of it. No, God has given us body, mind, spirit, soul to do something right now. And so what did they do? They led that uprising, not just once, but twice. And they freed themselves. And their spiritual practice, being at the core, they had to hear. They had to connect with the land that they were on, that they were tasked with pillage, with picking and with tending to. They organized their maps in communication with the land that they were on, right? And that's because they knew that there was a connection to spirit in their practice of udon, that it's not a demonized, unsafe XYZ, which is what the colonists will have you thinking.
Have you believe.
Right?
That's right. That's right. And
that it was a form, it was a path toward liberation.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think, can you remember the city, the name of the city, where I can't remember the name of the city, but the second time I went to Haiti, we went there and we went into the cave where the ceremony took place.
It wasn't. Oh, okay. Sorry. I was going to say Port-au-Prince, but maybe not.
No, it definitely was. No, we left outside of, I feel like we almost kind of went into the mountains, kind of speaks to the Maroon community kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't, but we went into it was something to be on the land and in that space where that took place. And they have a huge oversized life statue of Jean-Jacques Dessalines there, right? That's when I learned that, yes, Toussaint Louverture, yes, but Jean-Jacques Dessalines was a major factor, right? In that revolution, but I just remember going there, and you go inside. It was cool, it was cool. I'm calling it a cave. That may not be what they call it, but you go in, the water was still there. It was cool, and you just kind of think about the irony of what took place on that land and how Haiti is today, right? In the ways in which Europe, the world over, continues to keep them in that stronghold. So,
that's right.
Azmera, we got to end this segment. I'm getting all my cues from my left and from my front, like time out. We're out of time, but I still want to honor the fact that you are more than what you offered up today. I'm sure, I love to just talk to my guests about, what brings them joy, what makes them happy, and what we need to know about Azmera that's not connected to all this amazing work that you do. Although for some of us, this work is very much who we are, but it's also, I'm sure, some things you love to do for fun and what brings joy. So talk to us just a little bit for a moment, if you want to just share what brings you joy, what makes you happy, and what do you like to do?
Oh, I appreciate that question, and this has been such a gift. Let's see, what brings me joy? I grew up on the island, so I love going to the beach when I can. I also, I love to write. I write poems and I write songs, and I've been experimenting with writing raps, and that just brings me joy. Okay. So lately I'm like, I'll be in the studio and I'll put something together, It's something that I could just, you know what I'm saying? Time just flies by, and it's like 2 hours fast. So that brings me joy just to create. I like to paint sometimes. People, don't really know that. I don't really, put my painting out there, but it's just like a nice thing to do for some self-care practice,
Yes.
Yeah.
Put your painting out there, sis. Let's see them gifts that you have. So, Azmera, it has been a joy to have you with us. We certainly hope to continue. Well, I know I'll continue to work with you, but we certainly hope to bring you back and probably, do something with our justice ministry, even because we are really trying to make sure we kind of even strengthen more of how we see ourselves in this justice work, because we have to see beyond where we are to really do the work that we're called to do. So thank you for being with us. Can we give Azmera some love for being on the show today?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Reverend Ayers. You all are doing such important work, and I'm so honored to share this time. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
And so have a wonderful rest of your...
Don't hang up just yet. Hold on for a moment. Just for a moment as I close this, I want you to hang on after for just a moment. So listen,
Okay.
Don't forget, we have a piece of merchandise. So we're gonna pick up the pace without more than a T-shirt. But right now, if you can support us to make sure we can continue this podcast, we have our Fannie Lou Classroom T-shirt that's right here that Shirley's holding up, so she can't be seen on the camera. But it's available for your purchase. We would love for you to support the work that we are really trying to do to have this platform, this educational platform, this dynamic learning community where we learn from each other. Right? We bring in people to talk about things. But it's about all of us being able to offer up, our knowledge, our ways of knowing, our way of being. We all have something to offer. It's called brick by brick, right? We're saying we're going to lay brick on top of brick, and it takes all of us bringing our bricks to the conversation. So don't forget, share Fannie Lou's Classroom to make sure people like us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, like our YouTube channel, but also hit the notification bell so you can be alerted when we go live. Until next Thursday, have an amazing rest of your day, amazing weekend, and we will see you next week in the classroom.
From the church house.